Yeah, I mean, famously, the deck that I won with is not a very good deck.
By now you probably know about Olle Rade and his funny little spider deck that won the 3rd ever Pro Tour in 1996. Widely considered to be one of the worst decks to ever win a Pro Tour, Olle's deck might be full of cards that are easy to make fun of now, but his understanding, deck building, and metagaming were brilliant for the time. But what if I told you there is another? A deck that looks similarly stupid on paper, but is in actuality incredible. One that attacked the nuances of a metagame with a card people probably pass on in draft. A deck that looks like it makes no sense, but its origin, design, and piloting turned something that no one else even thought about for the tournament into a pile of cards good enough to take it all down. All taken on a legendary run from nothing to the top of the Magic world in a single weekend. In moments that seem like miracles, that belies what's really going on in one of the Pro Tour's genuinely best Sundays in memory. The story of one Canadian and how he accidentally took over a format with a deck no one but he believed in. This is the story of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. While it might take a miracle or 16 to win some Pro Tours, some questions should have easier answers. And if the question you're asking is why can't I ever find a mattress firm enough, then this video's sponsor Plank is your answer. Plank is an ultra firm flippable mattress endorsed by the American Chiropractic Association, designed to promote a neutral spine position, improving your posture and back health. While looking for a new mattress for the bedroom, I personally wanted something that wouldn't take too long to decide on or arrive. And this Cow King Firm Luxe with their Glacier Text cooling cover was perfect for the space while being an absolute breeze to set up. After a few weeks with my Plank mattress, I feel like I've already started sleeping better, and I love that the mattress firmness means I don't sink into the mattress while I'm trying to get a good night's sleep. It was also ridiculously easy to order online versus going into a store, and it ships at split-second speed. Plus, Plank is designed and assembled in Arizona and ships for free anywhere in the US, with no middleman, which also means they can use premium materials without premium cost increases. Plank also gives you a 120-night sleep trial, as well as a limited lifetime warranty, so you can truly try before you buy. I love my Plank mattress, and I think you would too. If you're looking for an ultra firm bed, check out plankmattress.com. You can click on the links below and get 30% off your order with code HUNGRYONPLANE. After checkout, you can even contribute to supporting the channel more directly by telling them I sent you in their post-purchase survey. Say goodbye to compromising between comfort and support, and enjoy the best of both worlds with Plank. Thanks to Plank Mattress for sponsoring this video.
And we'll also bring you the complete roster from the showdown that is the Players' Championship.
And Alexander Hayne is going to be one of those players competing for that title.
Let's take a look at his winning deck.
Our hero for this unbelievable top 8 is professional Magic player Alexander Hayne. A player with multiple Pro Tour top 8s and a whopping 12 Grand Prix top 8s, including 5 wins, Hayne is one of Canada's modern masters of the game. But in 2012, at the last Pro Tour of a truncated transitional season, Hayne was just another competitor. At the time, his biggest accomplishment was getting second at a Grand Prix in his home city of Montreal, Quebec in Canada. And now he finds himself in his first ever Pro Tour top 8. And his journey has been unique to say the least. Both Hayne's literal travel from Canada to the block constructed Pro Tour in Barcelona and his path to the top 8 he now finds himself in are genuinely epic journeys. Most Pro Tour competitors want to spend a few weeks before any big event making sure they get some testing in and maybe seeing some local sites that aren't just the convention center the tournament is held in. For Alexander Hayne, a Magic player who is very good at extracting value from both MTG and life, he and his teammate David Kaplan, who Legacy enjoyers may know as the Canadian that top 8'd the 2007 Legacy event at Gen Con with a tempo deck that for the longest time was named in honor of his country of origin, Canadian Threshold, realized something unique about the travel options from Canada to Spain. For anyone that remembers the ancient Pro Players Club, which was basically an incentive program for Pro Tour players that rewarded you for both going to a lot of and doing well at high-level events, whether that was the Pro Tour or Grand Prix that got you different levels of status based on your pro points in the year that all gave you different benefits. While this system went through at least one major rework before being removed entirely, at the time, Hayne and Kaplan are level 3 pros, which is good enough to get you a PT invite you're allowed to use on an event you aren't already qualified for, and they're both using their Player Club invites for PT Avacyn Restored. What it doesn't get you though, which higher levels of the club did, are flights to the tournament. So after looking at options, Hayne realized that a 2-week cruise across the Atlantic would be cheaper than the airfare he'd otherwise have to pay.
You were invited to one Pro Tour of your choice besides the one you were already qualified for. We were both using it for this Pro Tour Avacyn Restored, but there was no flight included with it. Back then, David Kaplan and I were both qualified to this tournament in Barcelona, but we had to pay our airfare ourselves. And he looked up and he thought it's actually cheaper for us to take a cruise ship across the Atlantic instead of to fly, because earlier that year there'd been some kind of disaster at the cruise ship crashing near Greece or something, and so people were hesitant to take cruise ships. And then combined with the fact that around that time of year, cruise ships often transition from touring the Caribbean to touring the Mediterranean, and so you can get a very cheap cruise because they want to move the ship over, and not that many people are interested in going across the Atlantic. So it was a 2-week cruise, and it was $700 Canadian each, everything included, food and transport.
As this is a mixed Pro Tour event, as all PTs have been since that change was implemented in 2009, and there are only 2 people testing for this Magic event on the entire cruise ship, there's not a lot of draft practice that can happen. But between the included meals, live entertainment, and presumably some enjoyment of their temporary life at sea, Hayne, Kaplan, and Team Canada used their time to do the one thing 2 people on a boat can reasonably do: start brewing their block constructed deck. And whether it's that no one else thought of it, people building and then dismissing it, or the fact that it was only being worked on by a small team of Canadians, 2 of which are currently traversing the Atlantic on a cruise ship at the time, no one else but these players will bring this infamous deck to the Pro Tour.
Yeah, so how it started was Kaplan and I are on the boat, and we have, a bunch of cards, but we haven't tested them, let alone in block constructed scenarios. But we're communicating with the rest of the team online, and they're trying various things and sending us deck lists to try. And one other member of the team, Noah Long, makes some kind of ramp deck that has both Entreat the Angels and Bonfire the Damned in it. I just had the idea playing with that. It says, well, if these miracle cards are really good, Entreat was perfectly fine card to just hard cast for 7 mana, because block construct is a bit weaker format. You get 2 4/4 angels for 7 mana. I compared it to kind of Broodmate Dragon from an earlier format. I don't know how many listeners here are familiar with Broodmate Dragon, but it was similar to that. Anyways, so I had the idea, what happens if we just put a whole bunch of miracles in the deck so that the chance of you drawing a miracle is much higher. And that kind of got the first version of the deck.
As a reminder, Avacyn Restored is the newest set in this 3-set block format. In fact, Triple Avacyn Restored, which we'll touch on later, was the draft format of this mixed Pro Tour 2. Imagine then that you're trying to build a block constructed deck for the peak of tournament Magic, and someone comes to you and says, hey, I took the new keyword from a set Miracle and just jammed every card with it in a deck. I think it's good. What do you think?
Stupid or something?
I think most people would wonder what on earth you're doing. See, Miracle was a pretty literally game-changing mechanic, at least in the sense of how you had to operate in a tournament, as it cared about when you drew your first card on any given turn. For the most part, the Miracle cards were reasonably costed spells that did a slew of different things. Sometimes they torched an entire battlefield, sometimes they gave you an extra turn, and sometimes they just returned some non-land permanents back to people's hands. One of the more exciting effects is Temporal Mastery, which gives you an extra turn, but at the cost of 7 mana, which is quite a lot for a Time Warp style effect. If you manage to trigger its Miracle effect though, well, it only costs 2 mana, just as good as the Power 9 card Time Walk. The catch was that you could only get the heavily discounted Miracle cost if a Miracle was the first card you drew that turn. This meant that not only did players have to relearn the mechanics of drawing their first card for the turn, being incredibly deliberate in showing which card they drew in order to not, blatantly cheat when trying to trigger a Miracle, but it also made for this fun, silly minigame of sorts. People always talk about how powerful, dramatic, and brutal top decks can feel, and Miracle was a Magic mechanic that dialed this feeling up to the absolute maximum. Miracle was so impactful that it even forced a mechanical change from legendary hand shuffler Brian Kibler.
So, the Miracle mechanic, some people out there might think that the Miracle mechanic is something that I take issue with because of the whole bonfire thing. You may have seen a certain GIF floating around the internet of a certain someone getting eliminated from Nationals, World Cup by the Team Taiwan that went on to win the event by getting bonfired. Very dramatic GIF, but it's actually not that. It's that I had to change the way I draw cards because you have to be able to show that it was the card you drew that turn, whereas I would just go like this.
And then shuffle it.
And then immediately shuffle it into my hand.
Yes.
Right? But because of Miracle, it fundamentally changed the way that I drew cards from my deck forever.
On paper, just think about how absurd this sounds. You're going to the Pro Tour, and your primary plan for Constructed is to build a deck around cards that reward you for getting lucky and drawing the right cards at the right time. While there is always some level of luck present when doing well at the PT, it seems foolish to bank your Constructed hopes on it, let alone build your entire deck around the mechanic. This deck choice wasn't just a show of blind faith though. Behind how silly this deck seems in theory, the way it was constructed was very clever, and it started by doing the one thing you should do with any deck that wants to get lucky: find ways to make more luck. Thanks to the graveyard nature of the block, blue got some cheap cantrips that aligned with that theme. Think Twice was a cheap draw spell reprinted in Innistrad with Flashback, and Thought Scour printed in Dark Ascension both help fill the graveyard while also letting you cantrip at instant speed. These two innocuous little draw spells turned out to be critical to the Miracles deck being able to function at all, as a key part of Miracle as a mechanic was that while it only triggered if you drew your card as your first one for turn, it could trigger twice as often as you might think, on your turn and your opponent's turn. This made cheap, instant draw spells incredibly appealing to the Miracles deck, as it basically doubled your shots each turn cycle of hitting a miracle and getting lucky. And like Alexander already mentioned, even if you had to pay full price for a miracle sometimes, that was often just good enough. With both Temporal Mastery and especially Entreat the Angels being powerful enough cards even if you had to pour 8 or more mana into them sometimes. While the original Miracle builds also began by playing Bonfire of the Damned in order to utilize the set's most powerful Miracle cards, the quirk of this block only having enemy color dual lands and not allied, something that was incredibly rare in a Magic set, especially at this time, meant that shaving down to just blue-white still gave you access to good Miracle cards while doing a very necessary streamlining of your colors. This is basically just a blue-white control deck, but instead of many of the classic tools that blue-white control has, you just have a bunch of miracles, and you kind of just hope that's good enough to get you to the late game where the deck feels practically unassailable. The deck even got to leverage the powerful new planeswalker from the set, Tamiyo. Tamiyo let you lock down permanents, draw cards, and if you ever got late enough where you could ult her and obtain her emblem, you were basically unstoppable. In fact, this is the exact reason for the deck's single main deck counterspell, Dissipate.
I think I won once or twice with the secondary win condition, which was Tamiyo plus Thought Scour. So if you could ultimate Tamiyo, then whenever a card goes to your graveyard, you just get it back, and you can Thought Scour your opponent each time you draw one card, they mill 2, and you can deck them out that way. You can Thought Scour yourself first to draw 3 cards effectively, because you mill those 2, but they go into your hand. And that was one reason the deck also had one copy of Dissipate, is so that for the end game you can find the Dissipate, and then you just have infinite counter spells with a Tamiyo emblem.
So, a deck of 8 cantrips, 16 miracles, some of them not so great, 4 Tamiyos, and 27 lands, all combined to form the base of this funny looking control deck. But despite the power of its top end, even with the mediocrity of a card like Devastation Tide, which was a miracle that helped bridge you to the later stages of the game, the deck still wasn't quite there. It needed one more piece to really take it from random pile to actually playable deck. A good deck even. Well, maybe not, but certainly a complete one. And the card that solved all of the remaining problems the deck had was a piece of draft chaff discovered in the dead of night in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, so that was basically that was the first version with all these miracles and Think Twice Thought Scour that we were trying. And Kaplan and I would play with it, and it just wasn't quite there. It would do something very powerful, but it wasn't consistent enough, because when you got a little unlucky, you just wouldn't draw the miracles, and your opponent can take that turn or 2 that they give you and just kill you, right? And I was kind of on the cruise ship. I was sitting out in the middle of the Atlantic on the balcony, just staring out at night into the abyss, basically the dark ocean, and just listening to music while scrolling through the list of cards, the spoiler, and to try and find something to fix this deck. And then, funnily enough, in my mix, the song Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen came.
In a blunt but effective omen inspired by a single poignant song from one of Canada's greatest songwriters came the answer Hayne was looking for. A 2-mana common so mid it would barely make your draft sideboard, Feeling of Dread. A cheap instant that tapped 2 creatures that you could flash back for 2 mana to do it all again. A stopgap if you're behind on board, a glorified fog at best, but Feeling of Dread did everything this deck needed it to do. It bought you time. You could mill it with Thought Scour, then flash it back. It was an instant you could hold up alongside Think Twice, and it gave you the turns you needed to play your miracles, whether you got the discount from getting lucky or not.
Because when you're playing Think Twice Thought Scour, you're always keeping 2 mana open in case you draw a miracle. And now if you don't, you have a backup plan of playing Feeling of Dread to tap their creatures, which kind of buys you a turn in a different way to get another turn cycle of trying to find a miracle. Also, the synergy with Tamiyo and Tamiyo's minus ability to draw cards for each tap creature your opponent controls is really huge. And then also the synergy with Thought Scour, when you mill yourself, you can hit the Feeling of Dread and flash it back. So it felt really good. Started with playing 2 copies, then went to 3 copies, and then ultimately 4 copies because it was just so good. Basically because the deck had the effectively unbeatable endgame. And the other thing, because you have Feeling of Dread, your opponent feels like they have to overcommit, because if they only have 2 creatures in play, then you can tap them down. So they want to have a third. And if they have 3, that maybe they get in with 1 creature, so they might even play more creatures out. But then you can Terminus them, or even Devastation Tide, and you just gain a lot of tempo that they've spent a lot of mana deploying these creatures. creatures. So that was really the glue that was necessary to make the deck playable.
Coming into the tournament in Barcelona after a 2-week cruise worth of constructed testing, a week with the team in person to finally do some drafts, the small but mighty Team Canada has a few of their players, Alexander Hayne included, on this Rogue Miracles deck. And to kick off constructed, Hayne immediately goes 0-2 with his team's brew. In fact, in the first 5 constructed rounds, he managed to win only 2 of them, going 2-3 before starting to draft the not so fondly remembered limited format Triple Avacyn Restored. Similar to his approach in constructed at this event, Hayne also had a pretty different take on how to navigate the draft format, bucking the trend of everyone massively overvaluing green-blue and dipping heavily into black in both his drafts to find success with cards that I honestly had never even heard of before he told me about his draft strategy.
But actually, I did better in limited this Pro Tour than I did in constructed. I came in and tested with my team for 1 week, and I think I lost, 1 or 2 matches of limited the whole week. I was just kind of really in the zone for this format. It is not a well-regarded format.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
People hate on it a lot. I think part of that is the sealed format is really, really abysmal. But the draft format, as draft is self-balancing. So the main thing was black was very much doing a different thing than other colors in the format. The best deck people thought in limited was blue and green soul bond. So you had these green creatures that if you have another creature, they can bond and they get, +2/+2 or +4/+4 each. And then the blue ones, they would, whenever they hit your opponent, you draw a card, things like that. And that obviously encourages you to have a bunch of creatures in play. Removal generally wasn't that good. So it was kind of tough to break up those synergies, which is one of the reasons people didn't like it. It felt like you get on the board, you have some of these really powerful cards, and it's hard to really mess with. Black wanted to instead had a thing of like having 1 creature in play, and then you have some removal, you have some things where you sacrifice creatures and some kind of mediocre removal spells. But I found that black was just really underdrafted because of that, and actually both my drafts I drafted black decks, base black deck, and 3-0'd both of them. Homicidal Seclusion kind of being a key card, which is a 5-mana enchantment that if you have only 1 creature in play gets +3/+1 and has lifelink.
Oh.
So yeah, and then my first draft deck actually had 3 of those in it, and at one point I even got all 3 in play. And so you just play 1 random creature and it kind of trades with 3 creatures of your opponents, and you gain 12 life. And what are they going to do? They can't really race you because your creature is lifelink. And again, if there's not that much removal in the format, so they can't really kill your creature to gain that much tempo. The best they can really do is bounce it and you just replay it, and they're kind of in the same spot.
Thanks to an unorthodox but effective approach to limited, Hayne managed to sail through the draft portion undefeated and kick into gear with his constructed deck just in time to make top 8 in 7th place. By every metric Hayne had for himself, he had already succeeded at this Pro Tour. His finish made him a Platinum Pro for the next year, giving him qualifications for the next year of events, appearance fees at PTs and GPs, and ironically airfares to future events, the thing he didn't have for this tournament that led him to take the boat to Barcelona where he cooked up this deck. He was also now right at the forefront of the Rookie of the Year race, and after the changes to the newly announced World Magic Cup, he'd also be the captain of Team Canada at the end of the season. Ultimately, Hayne wanted to be a professional Magic player, at least for the year that the highest level of the player's club status would allow him, and a top 25 finish made that possible. So after taking a significant step beyond that into the top 8, it felt like the rest of the event with his unique control deck was kind of a free roll. Still, there was a top 8 to be played, and for Hayne in his first one ever, he couldn't have found himself against a more formidable opponent. Mercifully, the red-white deck, which was by far Hayne's worst matchup, was nowhere to be seen in the top 8, successfully beaten out of the tournament by the mass of green decks with a Bant or Naya that made up most of the Sunday field, including Hayne's quarterfinal opponent, some guy named John Finkel.
I don't know. It's my first Pro Tour top 8 at the time, and I'm going up against John Finkel, not just some random person. So I wasn't that confident in how I was going to do.
Hayne has already navigated the tournament with his contrarian take on both constructed and limited to success, but now Canada's Miracles Creation has to go up against one of the best players to ever play the game, playing a deck generated by one of the event's super teams just to get to keep playing Magic. But with his fellow countrymen getting in the matchup testing overnight and nothing really to lose at this point, Hayne shuffles up in his suit jacket, which he had to buy for some of the cruise ship's more formal dinners, which is the only reason he's wearing it at all, to do battle against one of Magic's greats. I had the pleasure of not only talking to Alex about this tournament, but having his insight on each game of this crucial quarterfinal. So you'll be hearing a lot of his thoughts as we go through one of the most intense 5-game matches from this event, where a then rookie is taking on one of the GOATs. Game 1, which is always an important one in this era of the Pro Tour, because every other game after this one is sideboarded, and we pretty quickly see one of the problems in this matchup. Hexproof threats are tough to deal with, as an invisible stalker gets enchanted with a spectral flight and starts to go to town. John has both Invisible Stalker and Geist of St. Traft as his heavy-hitting hexproof threats, although the latter certainly hits a lot harder than the former without any enhancements. This game he only has the Stalker, but that seems more than good enough, as all of a sudden, Hayne's Tamiyo's and MVP Feeling of Dreads look pretty bad against creatures he literally can't target. Terminus would be a way to get out of this, one of Hayne's more powerful options, especially when miracled, but when the only miracle he's able to find is a Devastation Tide to bounce the offending permanents, Finkel swiftly replays his threats and takes the first game when no other answers are forthcoming. John's Spirit's deck is an interesting mix of temper elements and heavy hitters cooked up by the Star City Games Black team from the mind of the one and only Sam Black. And early on, you can start to see what kind of problems Hayne's deck has in this matchup. Between the cheap, sticky threats, ways to buff them, and even a spot of counter magic with John's own Dissipates, and the aggro control draws can look to take out the Miracles deck before it gets a chance to set up. Going into game 2 though, Hayne and the team have correctly recognized two important elements of the deck Finkel is piloting that they might be able to exploit. The first is that the mana is bad.
So because of that, I was very concerned of post sideboard where John gets to add Dissipates into his deck, and of course, you know, he can play the aggro control deck where he draws plays an early threat out and then can counter my attempts to answer it, right? However, based on our strategy became that their deck has a very poor mana base, so we're actually kind of playing a bit of a mana denial strategy in this matchup.
The second is that this slice of Magic history is using the Champions of Kamigawa Legend rule, and because Geist of St. Traft, one of the best threats in the entire format, is legendary, Hayne is able to use his own from the sideboard simply as removal spells, which is funnily his most efficient answer to John's best card.
The Geist Wars begin. It also does favor me the just kind of playing a thing back and forth for a while, because the last Geist I can answer with a Terminus. Yeah, so I could play the Geist of St. Traft, but instead the Tamiyo that can't get countered here, I can tap down either his Geist or one of his lands, or I could draw 2 cards with it. Either way, it's better use of mana, and then potentially next turn if I have a land, I can play Geist plus have Dissipate up. I do know that John almost certainly doesn't have Wolfear Avenger in hand. And yes, you can see that I decided to go for John's Island instead of the Geist. Yeah, it prevents him from having Dissipate later. And again, as I said, my strategy, the strategy here is to play a little bit of mana denial. And you can see his mana base is pretty bad. So.
Yeah, really bad.
On the scoreboard now, with a very clean looking win showing off how Tamiyo can act like a little one-sided stasis on your opponent's lands, Alex pulls off a nice looking win for his deck, as John's mana problems only compound between his Pilgrim getting recycled by a Terminus and Tamiyo shutting off any other avenue he might have had back into the game, before a horde of angels put the hammer down on a game that was already out of reach. To start game 3 though, Hayne makes a subtle but crucial error.
I made a strategic error based on my team having told me that it's very important to save Terminus, you know, to be a big sweeper later, and I opted not to kill a Avacyn's Pilgrim. I believe that I believe I draw Terminus here and decide not to cast it, and that was a mistake. See, even the pause. Yeah, see, I should have cast that Terminus. I think, you know, part of it is, again, I'm also trying to not give John too much information from drawing and thinking about it, but I mean, ideally I should have, before, I wouldn't be at the point where I'm drawing Terminus and making the decision then. I would already think ahead of time, okay, if I draw Terminus here, am I going to cast it? What are the pros and cons? And like try and do that analysis.
Hayne's minor misstep here of not casting one of the first cheaper miracles he's actually been able to find this match based on his team's testing intel means one threat is all John needs. And even though Avacyn's Pilgrim doesn't have hexproof, it's more than potent enough thanks to increasing savagery to close out the game, as the miracles deck can't hit an actual miracle Terminus to stabilize. Game 4 though is a masterclass from Hayne, clearly understanding both the levels of play this match is being played at and all the different paths his deck can take to the late game. And of course, it's off the back of the deck's last minute addition, Feeling of Dread.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. In fact, Game 4, which I think a lot of it doesn't, I'm not sure how much made on camera, because I think when I rewatched, they skip a lot of it. So you don't get to see the fact that almost all the time, because of that, I was playing Feeling of Dreads in John's upkeep before, you know, he could draw, in theory, draw into a Dissipate, and I kind of got into that pattern. That was one cool thing I think I did in Game 4. But then I had another Feeling of Dread that I held back on, and John, thinking that I didn't have one, played, you know, his Strangleroot Geist out and pumped up, I think, the wrong creature, so that I could Feeling of Dread and tap it in an efficient way to keep a Tamiyo alive. I'm not sure if, I think that part you get to see, but you don't get to see earlier where I set up with the mind games of playing my Feeling of Dread in the exact same way.
After Hayne's Entreat takes out an early Garrick, the first copy of Feeling of Dread is able to buy enough time to build up a substantial mana base, but it's his timing on the second copy of Feeling of Dread where Hayne decides to try and leverage John's mastery of the game against him a little, setting up a line with Tamio where he shows maximum weakness to try and coax Finkel into overextending by intentionally not casting Feeling in the same upkeep window he'd used previously.
So John thinks that he's got it. He's got me dead with what he has. The way he's viewing it is these two wolves are going through, and the angel's blocking the wolf here. The wolves are both 6/6s, so he needs to do 2 more damage. So like if he knows I have Feeling of Dread, or even consider the possibility really, which I think he isn't because of the way I play the other one, it would be a lot worse for me basically if John played Stranglergeist and then Feeling of Dread, put Spectraflight on it, and then went to combat, would be a lot worse for me. But he did it this way because he's expecting that maybe at best I have Thought Scour into Terminus instead of Feeling of Dread.
Finally, it feels like Hayne gets to demonstrate the full power of the deck, going from control to combo and taking 2 extra turns while drawing 10 plus extra cards to force a deciding game for his tournament life. While Game 4 was excellently played by Hayne, we unfortunately cannot say the same for the start of Game 5, as he makes easily the biggest mistake of the entire tournament.
So of course, partly from thinking about that game, I'm a little distracted, and so here's what I was doing. Between games, you don't see that a lot of this, but I don't want John to know my deck is the same configuration when I'm on the play and on the draw. So I'm sideboarding in 5 cards and I'm taking the same 5 cards out every game, when I'm on the play or draw, just to hide that information from him.
In his first Pro Tour top 8 ever, shuffling up for his final game, Hayne presents an illegal deck, and he realizes very quickly what's gone wrong.
As it turns out though, I forgot a very key part of that for Game 5 because I got inside my own head a little bit. I forgot the key part of taking those 5 cards out.
In today's game, this isn't a big problem because you are actually allowed to do this. You can present 75 cards in Constructed after sideboard if you really want, assuming you have a standard 60 card main deck. But at this time in Magic policy, your sideboard in a tournament must contain exactly 15 cards at all times. Funnily enough, the rules changes that ensued to relax this policy and bring us to the current rules were almost assuredly influenced by this moment. As it stands though, it seems like Hayne is going to get a match loss without even getting to play 5 games of his quarterfinal. But after realizing what he's done, he does the only thing he can do and calls a judge.
He has 65 cards in his deck.
Yeah, I had 60 cards last game. I boarded the cards in, shuffling.
I boarded in the cards and I shuffled and I didn't take out the ones I wanted? What happens here?
What happens is that I just have this sinking feeling, especially when I'm grabbing in my deck. I'm like, back from after John shuffling it, I'm like, this feels a little bit big. I'm like, oh crap, did I remember to sideboard out those cards? I check my sideboard and it's 10 cards and my stomach drops. And I'm like, oh no. And I call a judge over because I'm like, Judge, I have presented a legal deck. I presented 65 cards. I forgot to sideboard out the 5 cards that I did. And we hadn't started the game yet, but we had shuffled and presented.
This moment curiously ends up resolving itself exactly as it should per the tournament policy of the time, and Alex, who both caught the issue and called the judge on himself, basically receives a warning instead of a game loss, and is able to reconfigure his deck to a legal 15-card sideboard configuration and play on. Keep in mind that neither player actually knew what was supposed to happen in this moment, and both of them are probably assuming Alexander is getting a game loss here, which would be a pretty awful way to have your tournament end. To John's credit, he is also pushing to actually play the game out here and doesn't want to see the quarterfinal end without the players getting to actually sling their spells one last time.
You can take out the 5 cards, we can play the game. I don't need to be a game loss.
So disaster is avoided, and one last game will be played to determine if Canada or the US is moving on to the first semi-final. It's here where John's mana base seems like it finally comes back to bite him a little, as his opener is not so hot. When John's first major play of the game gets countered and Tamio gets to come down on an empty board to further pressure Finkel's mana, it seems as though the fates have finally aligned in this final game. And as luck would have it, Hayne would finally find a miracle to seal this Game 5.
So that's already 5,000 US dollars.
And there's an Entreat the Angels.
It's a miracle.
And it is a miracle. Yeah, cheer from Canada.
And now this game is over. I have the check mark. John cannot win anymore. I mean, if I didn't have the Tamio in play, maybe Wilfir could do something, but I do, and I'd have to draw absolutely nothing, and he'd have to draw like all perfect cards.
John draws and looks. That's the game.
Alexander Hayne has defeated John Finkel. That was unbelievable.
And Dungeon Geist.
That is just startling. And to suddenly see, whoosh, Angels. Outstanding.
What was it like game to game? I mean, he goes up a game on you real quick, and you were drawing a lot of blanks in a lot of those games. Were you keeping the faith that the angels would come through for you?
Well, playing the deck it's a numbers game. You know some of the games you're not going to hit anything, but you accept that when you play the deck, and you're also going to get a bunch of free wins that you don't really deserve the same way. And I'd really like to thank John. He's such a gentleman, such a good sport. Like, I've the utmost respect for him.
Alexander Hayne had gone through the most turbulent match of his Pro Tour career against John Finkel of all people, while barely avoiding granting himself a game loss due to a silly technical mistake he could have easily prevented, all with a deck that no one else even dreamed of playing coming into this event, and by his own admission, he didn't even know how good it was. Now in the semifinals against Josh Cho, playing another Wolfir Silverheart powered deck, this time in the Naya portion of the color pie, Hayne wins 2 games in part to his opponent having to mulligan and having his mana base crumble out from under him, while losing 2 games to the raw power of Silverheart and the game-ending potential of Zealous Conscripts out of Cho's sideboard. Staring down yet another Game 5, Hayne once again demonstrates his deck's grit and range as a Snapcaster Mage flashback Entreat the Angels ends the game with a bang, after the all-star Feeling of Dread taps down Cho's remaining blockers and Hayne eats a 16 damage Conscript powered swing, only to combo finish his opponent with back-to-back copies of Temporal Mastery.
Temporal
Mastery. Attack you for 10.
In for 10.
14?
Blood is pounding in my ears.
He's at 14.
Oh, Canada.
Yep.
Here we go again.
Attack you for 10. Show you Temporal Mastery.
My extra turn? Yep.
Untaps again. Attack you again.
Oh my God! Alexander Hayne is on to the finals of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. That was unbelievable.
By the time he reaches the semifinals, Alexander Hayne has already locked up Platinum, is the captain for Team Canada at the World Magic Cup, and thanks to his quarterfinal win even, is now guaranteed to be Rookie of the Year as well. If he can win one more match, he'll have maximized every possible point of value he could have from this tournament with a deck that looks kind of unplayable and looks nothing like the other decks in this top 8. His final opponent is Galdernis Vidigoris, who is on the same team and deck that Finkel was. You know, the one that gave Hayne a rough time in the quarterfinals already? Hayne has already played 10 games of Magic just in this top 8 alone. Now he just has to win 3 more to be crowned Pro Tour champion. Game 1 sees Vidigoris mulligan to 5, and Hayne continues his quarterfinal plan of pressuring his opponent's mana base, as Feeling of Dread goes on the offensive this time to tap down an early Avacyn's Pilgrim before Devastation Tide into a backbreaking Terminus all but sews up the first game. Game 2, fortunes did not favor the Miracle player though, as Hayne mulliganed all the way down to 4 cards and lost in record time. Galdernis was back to 5 cards again in the third game as the game went back and forth, and eventually a race mounted between Hayne's Angels from an early Entreat the Angels and the Spirits of Vidigoris' deck. After Hayne's next Entreat came off the top as a Miracle, it looked like an easy win for the Canadian, but a Dissipate to counter the powerful sorcery kept the race in reach. Feeling of Dread bought enough time for another set of Miracled Angels though, and this time there was no counterspell to stop the chorus from crashing in for the win. Game 4 finally saw a reprieve from the large quantity of mulligans out of both players, and Vidigoris led out with a Strangleroot Geist blessed by increasing savagery. A hardcast Terminus eventually cleared that up, but Hayne started to struggle to find land number 7, after playing Think twice on 6 and still not finding a land. Geist of St. Traft looked to close out the game, but Hayne eventually found one of his own to take out the other, and it looked as though things might have finally stabilized. A flashy Wolfir Avenger resolved in the face of 6 untapped mana though, and then got joined to its bigger brother Wolfir Silverheart, which started swinging in for the last few chunks of damage while also taking out the Tameo that was trying to dig Hayne out of this. The slight mana screw from turn 6 though turns out to be more of a mana flood, as with no more Feeling of Dread to buy time and no miracles coming off the top of his deck, Hayne flashed his handful of lands as Galdernis was able to get Silverheart and friends over the line and into the last game anyone will ever play at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. Game 5 began with another mulligan to 6 from Hayne, who in fairness, mulliganed very aggressively with this deck on principle, as its best hand simply contained lands and cantrips. After all, you want to leave all your miracles in your deck and not in your hand. Vidigoris kept a somewhat suspicious 7 though, as the turn 1 Avacyn's Pilgrim he played off of a forest got hit by Feeling of Dread in his upkeep the following turn to slow down the ramping threats, and he had to pass without playing a second land. Mercifully, he found land number 2 the next turn, but his Pilgrim had still failed to make mana at a relevant phase of the game, getting tapped down by the flashback of Feeling of Dread. When the Pilgrim got tapped down for a third time by a second copy of Feeling, Galdanis just decided to enchant it with Spectral Flight, not the intended target for that aura, but Hayne was struggling on his own side of the board as he consistently was using cantrips to try and make land drops of his own, and had crucially found only a single plains, with the rest of his early plays being islands, which aren't very good at casting his best miracle, Entreat the Angels. When Galdanis started discarding to hand size after his Pilgrim got tapped again, Hayne continued to find only islands, but was able to cast a Tamiyo onto the practically open board, basically sealing the fate of this Pilgrim forever, who had been tapped down literally every single turn of the game since it was played on turn 1. When the second threat of the entire game, Geist of St. Traff, got met with a Dissipate dredged up by a Snapcaster Mage, it seemed as though the game was nearing its end. And it would have been if the deck had ever coughed up a second Plains, as Hayne saw an Entreat as his draw for the turn after he untapped. Once a second Geist entered play, Hayne did finally find a second white source, but will now need either a Miracle or a third Plains to hardcast the Entreat that's in his hand to finish off this game. Tamiyo though was also threatening to ultimate for Hayne, which forced the Geist of St. Traff to roll in towards it, letting Snapcaster trade off with the 2/2 legend as Tamiyo fell down to 2 loyalty. Even though a few Think Twices did finally find the third Plains, it turned out to not matter, as Hayne's next draw step found an Entreat for 5 that heralded the beginning of the end.
Okay.
Treat the Angels for 5.
Treat the Angels for 5.
Well,
Well, hello.
hi.
20 power of Entreat the Angels is sitting on the battlefield here in the final game of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. Alexander Hayne, are you about to become the first Canadian individual Pro Tour winner since Terry Borer in New York 1997?
No blocks.
Attack Tamiyo.
No blocks.
No
Tamiyo's
blocks.
dead.
There it is!
Hallelujah!
Alexander Hayne! Alexander Hayne is your Pro Tour Avacyn Restored champion of 2012. He entreated the Angels. Canada goes wild.
After 3 days of play, starting with a miserable constructed record with a dubious looking deck that to this day, Hayne isn't even sure quite how good it was, playing a soup of new cards that seem way too overcosted and luck reliant to be good, he navigates the full 15 possible games on Sunday to become the champion of Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. In a quiet moment on a cruise ship, staring out into the void of the Atlantic Ocean, a song came on that inadvertently prompted Hayne to find the one white common that his deck needed to put itself together for this historic run. And at the end of the weekend, it came full circle, as Hayne's win was loudly celebrated by his fellow Canadians cheering him on at the rail of the Pro Tour, all singing that same tune, Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
We got to get a look at that
I believe
if we can.
the connect. There we are.
Alexander Hayne's seemingly terrible looking list turned out to be very difficult to pilot correctly, but absolutely the correct meta call at the end of the day, with a top end that no one could really beat and tuned just tightly enough that it could actually realize that potential. Block Constructed is a funny place, but behind the stack of miraculous effects was a streamlined, thoughtful combo control deck that Hayne played to perfection. And of course, as his deck is wont to do, I'm sure even he'd say he also got a little lucky. Thanks for watching everyone. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to slap the like button and hit subscribe if you haven't already to stay up to date with all the channel's releases. Is this one of the worst Pro Tour winning decks of all time, or can you think of something else? Get in the comments and let me know down below. And finally, if you want to support the channel more directly, Patreon is the best way to do that, where you can get exclusive Discord access, behind the curtain looks at what's coming up, and even access to my full interview and quarterfinal watch along with Hayne himself. You can also send me a coffee if you're wanting to just directly donate to what we have going on here. If you like wild block constructed Pro Tour decks, then you're in luck. We love this stuff on the channel, so maybe check out this video too.